Hi, this is DougDoug, where we solve problems that no one has. Magic the Gathering is like food. It's not because you had a bad steak that all steaks are bad. Unless we're talking about werewolf steak. In that case, all of them completely suck. But anyway, I just went back to Magic the Gathering and I don't know, I felt like talking about it. Talking about some stuff that bothers me, some stuff that I like. So you can expect like 2 or 3 more videos to be done. I'll try to space them better, just so this does not become kind of a Magic the Gathering channel, like what happened when I was doing the Star Wars series. But anyway, there has been some stuff, mostly community related, that bother me, and I don't know, I just felt like talking about it. One of them is, of course, Netdecking. So Netdecking is the practice of not building your own decks. Instead of building your own decks, you search online, and you can grab a deck that another person made and you can play with that. And I see a lot of people complaining about this, which at least for me does not seem to make much sense. And most of the complaints are that Netdecking ends up creating a problem of lack of creativity, because then all decks are gonna be copies of copies of copies instead of being unique stuff. And just to keep up with the theme of explaining with food, that feels like saying that the US has the best food. Because, well, when someone says a country has the best food, they are talking about food that originated in that country. Meanwhile, on the US, most of the famous food they have came from other places. And to bring that to Netdecking, well, sure, you can have lack of creativity with Netdecking, but it's not where the lack of creativity originated from. It's not like what's causing the lack of creativity. It's just like it can just be one of the characteristics of it, but you can also find the same lack of creativity on a bunch of other places. And of course, where it originates, which is on the individual person making the deck. I'll get to that later. But anyway, that's like the main argument that I hear against Netdecking, the lack of creativity. But at the same time, like, sure, I can kind of agree with that. Kind of. I'll try to elaborate on that later. But sure, I kind of agree with it, but I don't know. I feel like Netdecking is something inevitable. Solely based on the huge amount of cards that Magic have, which makes it borderline impossible for someone to know them all, or not even know them all, but know a handful of them, to make their deck a good one. And it kind of reminds me of Kerbal Space Program. I just decided to try Kerbal Space Program again. Yes, it was because of Artemis too. I'm one of the people that started playing that game, that gave a chance to that game due to the new moon mission. But anyway, I tried playing that other times before, but never managed to do so. But this time I decided to actually go for it. But anyway, that deserves a video on its own. But on Kerbal Space Program, well, you manage a space program and you build rockets and you have missions to explore other planets. And the main issue that I have with that game is that I don't even know what I can do because the tutorial sucks. I think that's everyone agrees with that. They teach you the very basics of it, but it's one of those tutorials that are like, click here to do this, and they don't really explain the reasons behind the things you are doing. They just say, do this, click here, and you do this, click here, and you achieve this. But they don't explain like why you need to click in that place, why you need to achieve this goal. And that, if you don't search online, if you don't go after Scott Manley to learn the game, you have a lot of holes in your knowledge. Like there is in the game, there is cables that you can attach between parts of your rocket, and those cables will make things more stable. And that's a thing that I completely overlooked when I was playing. So I was like, okay, I searched online to like understand the basics of the game, and I was like, okay, I know the basics, I will try to do something on my own. I'll try to like reach the moon on my own. So I'll build a rocket, I'll probably fail, but I don't care. I'm gonna try to do it myself, with the knowledge that I already have. So I built a rocket, it was very unstable, I had no idea what was going on, but I couldn't even reach Kerbin's atmosphere. I couldn't even reach like the version of Earth from Kerbal Space Program's atmosphere. So I went back to Scott Manley, and then I watched his videos to see like how he was able to land on the moon. And when he was building his rocket, he uses this cable. He used these cables to attach parts of his rocket together and make it less wobbly. And that was something that I didn't even knew that it existed in the game. So next time I went to the game, and then I was like, okay, cables. And then I just attached the cables, and my rocket was like way more stable, and I was able to reach the moon. And the same thing happened to other goals, like to land on the moon. To land on the moon, you will have to do some better fuel management than to just do a flyby the moon. And in this case, there was yet another element that I didn't even knew the existence of, which was the fuel cables, which are cables that will transfer fuel from one rocket to another. And when you use that, you'll be able to get a better fuel management. I don't really want to get too deep into the rocket science, but basically when you are getting out of the ground, you need more power, so you need more engines than when you are on the vacuum. And using these fuel cables to transfer fuel from one rocket to another will help you to achieve that. And that's something that also I didn't even knew the existence of in the game. So I had a lot of trouble landing on the moon for the first time. And then I landed on the moon, and I went back to Scott Manley's videos, and then I saw like, oh, he uses these fuel cables. and that allows him to have a better fuel management, and that allows him to have a less heavy rocket, and then of course it will allow him to need less fuel. So next missions that I did to the moon, I implemented the fuel cables, the fuel lines, I think that's how it's called, and in that way I managed to achieve those goals better, and of course reach even further moons and planets, easily reach them. And I feel like with Magic the Gathering it's kind of the same, especially if you skip ahead, if you skip formats ahead, which is what I do. So there is kind of an idea of a pipeline in Magic the Gathering, because it's a really old game, and with time they started to create new formats to make it easier on the players to start playing the game. And these formats will be kind of like a guide on what to do next. So the basic, quote-unquote basic format, and the one that most people will start from, unless someone they know recommends something else. Like most people that I know recommend starting through Commander, because it's the most popular format. I recommend my friends starting from Modern, because it's the one with the biggest variety of cards. But anyway, if you don't have anyone to recommend you a format, you will probably start through Standard. Standard is the format that will use the newest cards. They will use the cards from the past 5 years. And this, of course, gets like the cards rotate. So it's always 5 years. It's always the past 5 years. So last year, 2025, you could use cards that got released from 2020 all the way up to 2025. This year, you can use cards from 2021 all the way up to 2026. Next year is gonna be from 2022 up to 2027. That's the idea of Standard and the rotation. So you will probably start through that. After a card becomes 5 years old, after the card cannot enter the Epstein Island anymore, you don't need to throw them away, because they are still valid on other formats. They are still valid on Pioneer, which is the next format. Pioneer uses cards from, just to make the math easier, Pioneer uses cards that got released from 2010 all the way up to today, all the way up until the end of times. That's Pioneer. And if you want to go back even more, you have Modern, which uses cards that got released from 2000 all the way up until the end of times. Like from 2000 up to today and up to the following years. And then after Modern, you have Legacy and Vintage, which uses cards from since the beginning of the game. And all of these 4 formats, Vintage, Legacy, Modern, and Pioneer, are non-rotating formats, which means the cards do not have an expiration date. As long as they obey this rule of being released after a certain year, they are valid in the format. Of course, there are ban lists, but I don't want to get into that. So in my case, I don't like Standard because, well, the last the last set that caught my attention was Phyrexia All Will Be One, which already rotated out of standard. They are not valid anymore, and since then, no other set they released caught my attention. I have no interest in any other set that got released after Phyrexia. There is one for dragons, but I'm not sure how it goes. So I don't have interest in standard. What's the next one? Pioneer. I also don't have interest in Pioneer because, well, there is a bunch of stuff that is not valid in there. There are a bunch of stuff that I like that are not valid on Pioneer, like Eldrazi Throne. Eldrazi Throne is a type of deck. I don't really want to get that deep into that because I like to have these videos to be easy for people that don't know the subject to understand them. It's kind of like a teacher nature that I have. So I'm just not get into much details. But Eldrazi Throne is a type of deck that requires a specific card that was not printed on modern sets. The last time these cards were printed was between 2000 and 2010, so they are not valid on Pioneer. For them to be valid, Wizards would have to print this card again, which they still didn't do. So Pioneer, not for me, because a bunch of stuff that I like is not valid in there, does not even exist in there. So I go for Modern, which is the one that has like the biggest variety of stuff. There is the biggest variety of cards. And also it removes the completely broken stuff that have on Vintage and Legacy. Because, well, those are the formats with the biggest variety, right? Vintage and Legacy, because they use cards from the moment the game got released. But that means they also have completely broken cards, because, well, at the beginning of the game they didn't really knew where to go and how to actually balance the game. So Modern solves that problem of like the completely broken cards being out of it. It still has broken cards, but not even close to the amount on Legacy and Vintage. So that's a format for me. The problem, that's 26 years of cards, which is a lot. Just doing a very quick research, I didn't fact check this, so don't quote me on there, but my quick research said that's about 15,000 cards. And even if you want to focus your deck, it's still a lot of cards. Like right now, I'm trying to do a dragon deck, and I try to limit that the best I could. Like I want it to be dragon deck. I want to be red, a mono red deck. Magic has a bunch of colors that represent different stuff and work in different ways. Red is one of those colors. So I want it to be dragon. I want the deck to have dragons because I like them. I want it to be red because I think it fits the aesthetic of being like aggressive. It fits the aesthetic of dragons, I mean. So that's what I want for my deck. If you go online and there is a website that lists every card and you can filter the cards, it's called Scryfall, the website. If you go there and you filter for dragon, red cards that are legal on Modern, it's like 100 cards. That's just for creatures. That's just for dragon creatures. I still need instants, I need sorceries, I need planeswalkers, I need lands, I need artifacts. I need a lot of other stuff to make the deck work. But let's just focus on the creatures. There's 100 dragon creatures on the color red. I can filter a little bit more, like I can remove stuff that requires a D20. I can filter stuff that, well, that is an adventure, because I don't like adventure type of cards. I can filter sagas, but that's not gonna remove much. It's gonna be still like about 80 dragon cards that I need to look through. And from those 80, I need to get something between 5 and 10 creature cards to put on my deck. So it's a lot. And if you have other hobbies, if you do other stuff, it's, as I said, borderline impossible for you to figure all of that. In part, Wizards is to blame for that, but I'm also not really sure if that was on purpose or not. At least the reasons they gave. There is like the lead director of Magic the Gathering, or like, I don't actually know his role, but in the company, but this guy posts updates on his blog. People call him Maro. I know it's like Ma comes from his first name and Ro comes from his last name, but I don't remember what the name of this guy actually is. But he is like a big guy on Magic the Gathering, and he posts updates on his blog. And in one of those updates, he said that the amount of cards released was to try to prevent netdecking, because they started to release a lot more cards in the last years, and the reason that he gave for that is to try to prevent netdecking, because if they release a bunch of cards, it makes it impossible for people to actually follow up all of the cards, and this way they will not make decks online, which does not seem to make much sense for me. At least for me, it seems like that will just make the problem even worse, because, well, now there is a lot of cards and it's not reasonable for me to do all the research on the cards, but I can team up with other people and we can split the research, and then we can come up with a list of cards that actually works and then post that online, which is what happens, because it turns out the world is a really big place. Sorry. So we'll have a bunch of people trying different stuff and then comparing with each other, and then they will come up with a list of cards that actually work. So we just made the problem even worse. And also that sounds more of an excuse to me than the actual reason. The actual reason for me is more like, well, they want to make money. And how to make money? Printing even more cards. And this that Mauro said sounds just more like an excuse. But let's pretend it's true. They decided to print more to prevent netdecking, but that's like that series. Oh, how's it called? Great Moments in Unintended Consequences. It's a great series that talks about people trying to solve problems and then making things even worse. That's how it sounds like. Because now it's just like a bunch of cards that makes it impossible for a single person to sit through all of them and just like come up with a deck on their own. Now it's needed, it's required that they look online to at least help to filter out some of the cards. But anyway, amount of cards, borderline impossible for someone with other hobbies to actually come up with a list. But there is a suggestion which is following the pipeline that I mentioned before. You start with standard, and then you go to after you build your collection and you build knowledge, you move from standard to pioneer, and then you keep building your collection and building knowledge, and then you move from pioneer to modern. So I saw this recommendation because then it would kind of try to like prevent you from net decking. You play the game, build knowledge and collection, and then move to the next level. And then you keep doing that until you're happy or you reach vintage/legacy, which there is nothing after that. But also that does not solve the issue because, well, there is a big variety of cards on Magic the Gathering. And okay, let me use a actual example of something that happened with me. Toxic and Proliferate. Those are two mechanics that introduce another win condition to the game. So, like, what's the most common way of winning a match? Is dropping your opponent's life from 20 to 0. That's the most basic win condition. And of course there will be other mechanics that will give you other win conditions, like Toxic. Toxic is a trait of some creatures that they will have a value of Toxic, like Toxic 1, 2, 3, and so on. And when those creatures cause damage to a player, that player will gain a poison counter equals to the value of Toxic. So a creature with Toxic 2 will give the player 2 poison counters. And then there is Proliferate. Proliferate is another mechanic that will increase counters by the amount of 1, or like, unless the card says Proliferate 2 or Proliferate 2 times. So let's say I gave 1 poison counter to my opponent. Like, I had a creature with Toxic 1, that creature attacked my opponent and gave him 1 poison counter. Then I use a card with Proliferate, and now my opponent has 2 poison counters. 1 from the creature, 1 from Proliferating. And once he reaches 10 poison counters, he loses the game, no matter how much life he has. Which kind of leads to some interesting matchups. Like, I was playing against a guy that had a deck for gaining life, and he was like on 40 plus life points. But he still lost the match because I gave him 10 poison counters. So I like that. And the issue is, since the moment that I started playing Magic on 2020, around 2020, there has been only one set on Standard that is focused on Toxic and Proliferate. The same way, since the moment that I started playing the game, there has been only one set focused on werewolves. There has been one set focused on dragons. So let's say I'm following the pipeline. I'm playing Standard, and then when I have enough knowledge, I'll move to Pioneer. But the problem is, well, I like Toxic, but the Toxic deck that I used is not valid on Standard anymore. And as I said, since this set Phyrexia all will be 1, there hasn't been any other Magic set that caught my attention. There hasn't been any other set that I looked at and I thought to be interesting enough for me to play. So basically I'm locked out of standard because nothing there seems to fit my playstyle. Nothing there seems to like fit the aesthetic that I like. So if I want to keep playing Magic, I need to move on to Pioneer because it's where my toxic deck is at. But even like that, it's still 10 years of cards that I need to research. It's cards from 2010 all the way up to 2020. Because like I started playing on 2020, so the research from 2020 up to 2025 I already did, and I know there is no toxic set besides Phyrexia or will be one. So, and now this set is on Pioneer, so if I want to build a Pioneer deck, I need to search 10 years of cards to see if there is something that fits this deck that I already built. And the same is gonna happen to Modern. If, let's say, I keep playing Pioneer and I keep building my collection and building knowledge of it, but still no other set focused on Toxic was released. So if I want to go to Modern, it's another 10 years of cards that I need to research. And the same thing will kind of happen for everything else, because Magic has a big variety of cards and a big variety of teams, and they don't just cycle between those teams, but they create new stuff. So we'll have like old teams like dragons, Phyrexians, fighting with stuff like Drift, which is a new set, a completely new set that never has appeared before. So again, when I was playing like Standard all the way back when I started the game, and I saw there were dragons in the game, that's like something that I wanted to do. I wanted to build a dragon deck because I like dragons. But at the time, the new Tarkia set, the new set focused on dragons, was not released yet. So if I wanted to play dragons, I would have to go back to Pioneer. And that's someone like with no knowledge of the game whatsoever, because I just started playing. Like I started playing through Standard, like day one. I started playing, I saw a dragon, and I thought, whoa, that's cool, I want to build a deck solely of dragons. But there is no dragons on Standard, or there is not enough dragons on Standard for me to build a complete deck around it. So that's like day one, I want a dragon deck, I need to go back to Pioneer. And that's me having no knowledge of the game, just having to research 10 plus years of cards. And in that case, Netdecking becomes something that is kind of mandatory. You cannot like get away without Netdecking. And now that I have some friends that started playing the game, it's kind of the same thing. I just told them to start straight from Modern because it's the one that has the biggest variety. Because if they start through Standard, they will not enjoy the game because there is nothing there. There is no theme, there is no set on Standard right now that fit the aesthetics that they like. Like one of my friends wants to play with an Eldrazi deck, and Eldrazi, I think I say this on the video, but it basically does not exist on, well, it does not exist on standard, it basically does not exist on Pioneer, and it only exists on, on modern and vintage and legacy. So if this friend tries to play Magic through standard, they will quit the game. Because there is nothing there that caught their attention. There is no set in there that they enjoyed. The same thing for Pioneer. And how is this person that has no knowledge of the game is gonna play the game, is gonna have a deck without netdecking, without searching online for the best cards to make his deck, or to just straight up copy a list from the internet? And as I said, like, huge amount of cards. That's like 26 years of cards. And there is no way for them to just sit through that with no knowledge of the game. And even me, that I have a bit more knowledge, I cannot sit through all of that. And even if I sit through all of that and I recommend him cards, it's gonna be kind of the same. But instead of using the internet, they will be using me. Like, asking for someone more experienced than you to build a deck is gonna end up the same way. But instead of using the internet, you're using someone with a bit more knowledge. So at that point, why not to just go to the internet? Which you will probably have the people with the highest knowledge of the game. Like, you can just go through the competitive level. But anyway, that's the reasons why I'm not against netdecking, and I don't think that's a problem. And just to go back to the food aesthetic, it's not because the US do not have good original food that they are not able to improve on the stuff that they got from other countries, right? And the same thing happens with netdecking. It's not because netdecking can have the problem of lack of creativity that it will have the problem of lack of creativity, and in some cases it can even solve that issue. Like with an example, goblin decks, mono red goblin decks. There is kind of a joke on Magic the Gathering, which is that mono red goblin decks will, on 99.999% of times, be focused on creating tokens. Don't want to get too deep into it, but the idea is that you will have cards that create creatures, and with goblins you will create a bunch of weak creatures. Like, you will create a bunch of creatures that have the power of 1 and the life of 1, but you can win matches because you're gonna create thousands of those creatures. So there is kind of a joke that mono red goblin decks will very likely be focused on creating tokens. So let's go back to me. If I went to create a goblin deck on my own, which I tried doing, I focused on creating tokens because that's the knowledge that I had. Like, I started playing through Magic Arena, the official online version of Magic, and one of the decks they give to new players is a goblin deck focused on creating tokens, focused on creating a bunch of weak creatures that will give you the win based on the numbers of creatures that you have. So I tried to create a goblin deck, and I end up doing more of the same. I end up doing what most people that has a mono red goblin deck does. I create a deck focused on creating tokens, focused on creating a bunch of weak creatures. It was a deck solely made by me, but I would say that it's not a creative deck. It's a very common deck that everyone that goes for goblin does. And then I went to the internet. I went Netdecking, and then I found out about the 8 and 12 walks, which are goblins. It are decks. There are goblin decks, mono red goblin decks, not focused on creating tokens, and instead they are focused on having a bunch of creatures that you can easily cast, and they will make other creatures stronger. So I had to check on something. So the 8 and 12 walks is not focused on it's not focused on creating tokens, but instead of casting low cost creatures and then making other creatures stronger. So you will cast a bunch of creatures with power 1 or 2, but then you will have abilities that you can trigger that will then increase their power and toughness. And that's a deck that is not that common. Like, if you hear about a mono red goblin deck, you're gonna think of decks that create tokens and not decks that work like the 8 and 12 wax that will cast like low cost creatures and then make them stronger. In that case, an argument can be made that Netdecking kind of improved the creativity of it. It improved on the variety of decks that you will see on the game. Because, well, I didn't end up making the same thing that most people do, which I would have not achieved if I didn't have gone to the internet, if I didn't have gone searching online for other possibilities, because I didn't even knew these other possibilities existed. And then we go back to the Kerbal Space Program problem of me not even knowing what I can do in the game. But anyway, that's what I had to say about Netdecking. That's what's on my mind. And yeah, I still don't know how to finish these videos. But anyway, I guess that's it.